AITA for changing the locks and exposing my girlfriend's cheating with her ex 3 times? I've been with my wife for nearly 6 years. We met long distance. She was living in London, England, and I was in Philadelphia. We spent a solid year getting to know each other through FaceTime, endless texts, and visits every 2 or 3 months until, finally, I decided to pack up my life and move in with her. That was 5 years ago. Since then, we've built a life. A small apartment out in the burbs, 2 rescue cats, a garden she babies, and a quiet routine. Nothing fancy, but solid, until 3 weeks ago. And the worst part is that it wasn't a fight, a new affair, or some huge, scandalous betrayal. It was a conversation, or more like a casual confession. She said it like it was just some anecdote, like she was telling me she forgot her keys or ran into an old high school buddy at the grocery store. We were out for a walk, something we do every Saturday afternoon. That day, we were strolling through a park down by the river. She was calm, happy even. She told me work was looking up, that her boss had finally given her props for a project she'd pitched. Everything normal, everything comfortable. And then, out of nowhere, she just dropped something like, "You know, honey, right before you moved here, I went out with him again, one last time. I guess I needed to close that chapter." And I just stopped, literally froze mid-stride on the path, not quite processing what I was hearing. Him? Who's him? Why use such a light tone to talk about a last time, with someone who clearly meant something? What came next felt like a movie in slow motion, but with no soundtrack, just silence and confusion. She explained she meant her ex, the guy she'd been with for 3 years before me, and that, a few days before I actually arrived to live with her, they ended up spending the night together. It was just intimacy, she said. No point in hiding it because it wasn't serious, just something she needed for closure with him, like a final goodbye. My first reaction was just emptiness. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't even look pissed off. I just stood there, silent, completely still, like my body had shut down all systems and gone into emergency mode. She kept talking, like she needed to justify it with all this self-help jargon, that she hadn't done it to be malicious, that she felt like, before starting a new life with me, she had to make sure nothing tied her to the past, that she didn't think it was cheating because we weren't living together yet and hadn't made any formal promises, that, for her, it was part of emotional closure. And there's the kicker. For her, it was closure. For me, it was a beginning. That exact point in time, that very weekend, I was packing up my apartment, saying goodbye to my folks, quitting my job, and getting all my paperwork together for the move. Meanwhile, she was sleeping with her ex one last time. Maybe, to other people, that'll seem like no big deal. Maybe someone will say, technically, you weren't together yet, or you hadn't arrived, or it's her body, her decision. And I don't argue with that. I don't want to turn this into some moral debate, but that doesn't change how I feel. Betrayed. The worst part of it all is how she said it. No guilt, no tension, no clue how it might land with me. It was like she genuinely believed it didn't count, that it shouldn't hurt, that it had no real weight in our story, as if the emotional clock only started ticking from the day I stepped foot in her apartment. We walked home in silence. She thought we'd talked it through. I was just thinking about the bed we slept in, the couch where we watched shows, the bookshelf with the books we bought together, all of it built on a truth that only she knew. And the worst thing is, my mind started racing, doing the math. Was it really before I got there, or was it during those first few chaotic weeks with unopened boxes everywhere? It could have happened while I was crashing in the spare room until we got the place sorted. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to her like a stranger. I felt that if I touched her, I was crossing some line I no longer understood, as if the body I knew now had a history I hadn't signed up for. She asked me if I was okay. I told her yeah. I lied, because I didn't even know how to answer that myself. I don't know if the worst part was what she told me or the fact that she thought it didn't matter. That keeps replaying in my head like a dull throb. It wasn't anything serious. You weren't here yet. It was just intimacy. Words that should be reassuring, but in reality, just make you feel like more of a fool. That night, while she slept like nothing had happened, or pretended to sleep, I don't even know anymore. I holed up in the kitchen with a bottle of wine I didn't even like. It wasn't a get-drunk kind of night. It was more like a ritual, a way to burn through the hours without facing the silence of the bedroom, the kind of cheap wine you grab for a dinner party when you don't want to spend much. I'd saved it for an occasion where it didn't matter, And that night, it fit perfectly. I watched the clock. 2:47, then 3:20, then 4:05, and all I could think about was that damn weekend. Her and him in a bed that wasn't ours. The same hands that now held me, that touched me, that caressed me, had been on another body right before welcoming me. I pictured the scene, not wanting to, but unable to stop it. Did she look for him? Was it planned? Did she talk to him about it? Did she say, "This is the final goodbye"? And what did he think? Did he know about me? Did he care? Sunday morning came, and I still hadn't slept. I got in the shower and just stood there for almost half an hour, the water beating down on the back of my neck like it could wash something away. She was still asleep when I got out. She looked peaceful, her face serene, like the world was perfectly in order. And I just thought, how can she be so calm when she just blew up everything I thought we had? When she finally woke up, she acted like nothing happened. She hugged me from behind while I was making coffee, like she always did, that comfortable habit of our life together. My mind was a million miles away. I could barely fake a smile. That day was a parade of superficial chit-chat. Were we doing laundry? Did we need groceries? Did we want to watch a movie later? Everything I didn't want to talk about, except the one thing I needed to understand. At some point, she asked if I was acting weird about something, and I lied to her again. Told her I'd slept badly, had a headache. Did she believe me? Or did she just pretend to? Who knows? 2 more days went by like that. I tried to swallow it down, tried to keep the routine going, because that's what you do, right? You cling to the familiar so you don't feel like everything's falling apart. But every time she touched me, I felt a disconnect. Not anger, not contempt, something more subtle, like I was kissing someone who wasn't really my wife, but a version of her hiding something behind her eyes. I couldn't take it anymore, and it all came out Wednesday night. We were having dinner, and she was talking about some new plant she wanted for the balcony. I couldn't pretend. I put my fork down and asked her straight up, "Do you really think what you did wasn't a betrayal? Do you honestly believe it doesn't count?" The silence was leaden. She looked down. She didn't seem surprised, like she'd been waiting for it. Maybe she knew she'd handled it badly, or maybe she just found it hard to face what she'd done. She told me it wasn't betrayal, that at the time we didn't have a formal commitment, that everything was fuzzy, that I still lived in another country, that there wasn't a clear promise, that she didn't cheat on me because we hadn't officially started. She used that word, officially. I wanted to laugh in her face. I asked her what officially meant. Weren't the hundreds of hours talking, the visits, the plans, the tears at airports real? Did we have to sign a contract for her to feel like she owed me respect? And then came the part that hurt the most. She told me she never said anything before because she thought it didn't matter, that if she mentioned it, it would ruin everything over something that didn't change anything, that it had just been a goodbye, that it didn't mean anything emotionally, that she'd even considered never telling me. That's when I lost it. I didn't yell, but my voice cracked. I told her that hiding it was a bigger betrayal than the act itself, that she'd robbed me of the right to know what this life together was starting with, that if she'd told me before I moved, I might have made a different decision, not because I'm some prude, but because, for me, respect starts with the truth, not with excuses. She cried, covered her face with her hands, said she didn't want to hurt me, that she only thought it was a closed chapter, that she loved me, that if she could, she'd go back and tell me everything. But that, in her mind, she really thought it was a detail not worth destroying us over. I told her I hadn't been able to sleep since she confessed, that every touch now brought doubts, that I no longer knew if what we had was as sincere as I thought, that the foundation of our life together now felt contaminated. And she begged me. She told me she was sorry, that she hadn't realized the damage until she saw my reaction, that in her head it wasn't cheating, that she simply didn't understand the scope until she saw me break. I don't know if I believe her. I don't know if I want to believe her. I only know that, at that moment, I felt that love isn't always enough to erase a betrayal, however unofficial it might have been. 2 days passed after that conversation, and there were no more words between us. We slept in the same bed, yeah, but we didn't talk. She tried, sometimes, to reach out, to start conversations about anything else. I answered in monosyllables. I was there physically, but not emotionally. I felt her talking to me from a different room than the one I was in, even though we shared the same space. On Saturday morning, after another mostly sleepless night, I made a decision. I got dressed, grabbed a small backpack, threw a few things in it, and told her I was leaving for a few days. I didn't announce it dramatically, didn't make a scene. I just said, I need space. I don't know how much, but I don't want to keep acting like nothing happened. She didn't stop me, didn't ask where I was going, didn't chase me. She just stood in the doorway, eyes red, lips parted, like she had something to say but didn't know where to start. I went to a college buddy's place, someone who now lives on the outskirts of town. I'd never had to use that friendship as a safety net, but when I showed up, he just asked if I needed to talk or if I preferred silence. I told him the latter. He gave me a room and asked no more questions. That first night without her was strange. I felt a small relief, like I could breathe a little easier. Not because I was away from her, but because I was away from the tension. But the relief didn't last. In the early morning, I woke up with a jolt, and, for a second, I felt guilty. Guilty for leaving her alone, for making her cry. What kind of husband leaves his home after a confession like that? And there was the problem. Part of me felt I should comfort her, take care of her, even when she was the one who'd hurt me. That pattern repeated in my head all weekend. A mental tug of war. One part wanting to go back, talk, understand, fix the wound, and another part clinging to the idea that if I went back too soon, I'd be validating her idea that her decision had no consequences, that what she'd done, in effect, didn't count. Sunday night, I got her first message, just want to know if you're okay. I didn't reply, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know what to say. What does okay even mean when you feel like your reality has been edited without your consent? How do you respond to someone who thinks their wound was a minor scrape, when you feel it like a fracture you don't know will ever heal right? On Monday, she sent another, longer message, one of those texts you write knowing you probably won't get a response, but you need to send it anyway. She said she understood my need for space, that she didn't want to pressure me, but that she didn't know how to fix something she didn't understand she'd broken, that she was willing to talk whenever I wanted, however I needed, that she felt stupid for downplaying what she did, and that, in her mind, she still believed she'd done it for me, to close a cycle, but that now she saw how absurd that idea was. Those words kind of took my breath away, because if there's one thing I've learned these past few days, it's that there's nothing harder than distrusting the judgment of someone you love. It's not just about the act, but what it reveals about their way of thinking. If she really believed that closing a cycle included sleeping with her ex one last time, what else does she consider valid under her own rules? What other decisions has she made with that twisted logic of doing what's emotionally right, even if it hurts in practice? I replied the next day. I asked her not to talk to me for a while, that I needed to process everything without the noise of her regret, that I wasn't doing it out of spite, but because her version of events had left me with more questions than answers, and that, honestly, I felt if I came back without resolving what was going on inside me, I'd become cold and resentful. And I didn't want to be that. Not yet. She replied with a simple, okay, I understand. I'll be here. And since then, she hasn't written. My friend's house became a kind of emotional quarantine zone. I woke up late, ate little, and half-assed work from my laptop. He didn't push. Sometimes he'd leave a coffee outside my door. Other times, he'd invite me for a walk. He helped more with his silence than any advice could have. It's hard to explain what it feels like to go from a shared life to a borrowed room where nothing has any history with you. The strangest thing was starting to doubt the memories, seeing them from a new angle. To think that, when we talked about our future, she'd already made a decision without me. That while I was selling my furniture, canceling utilities, and saying goodbye to my friends in Philly, she was closing her story with a hookup I never knew existed. And yeah, it might sound harsh, exaggerated, even melodramatic, but the truth is, what hurts most isn't the relationship, it's not the ex, it's that she never gave me the option to choose whether I wanted to start a life knowing that. She hid it, managed it, decided for both of us, and that, for me, isn't fixed with well-written apologies or well-intentioned silences. A week after I left, I found myself alone in a small downtown bar, a place I'd never been, but that seemed dark and unfamiliar enough to disappear for a while. The kind of joint where the music isn't trying to cheer you up and the bartender doesn't ask questions. I ordered a whiskey, even though I don't usually drink it. It burned going down, but at least it made me feel something physical, something different from the constant whirlwind in my chest. I looked at the glass and thought about a scene that kept replaying in my head. Me arriving at the apartment that first night, exhausted from the flight, dragging my suitcases down the hall, her meeting me at the door with that nervous, excited smile. The long hug, the kiss, the phrase she said, "Now our life really begins." And me believing it, swallowing that moment like it was sacred truth, thinking the past was settled. But now I knew that, just days before, the opposite had happened. That kiss was the beginning for me. For her, it was the end of something, lines crossing in opposite directions. How did she not get the symbolic weight of all that? I got back to my friend's apartment around 11. He was watching a show with his partner and barely looked up. They greeted me with a nod and offered me a plate of leftovers, which I passed on. I shut myself in the room with a feeling of defeat I couldn't explain. Not because I was away from home, but because I was starting to see that even if I went back, something essential wouldn't be there anymore. The following days were a mix of borrowed routines and thoughts that just coiled around each other. I'd think about what I would have done if the roles were reversed. If I'd been with someone right before starting our life together, would I have told her? Would I have hidden it? And if I told her, would I expect understanding? And the answer was clear, no. Not because I wouldn't have done it, not for some moral high ground or preemptive fidelity, but because, for me, that moment of change, that break between the past and the new, was sacred. I wouldn't have tainted it. I wouldn't have wanted to carry a piece of yesterday into the beginning of something supposed to be fresh, clean, whole. She did, and that messed me up more than anything. On Friday, after almost 2 weeks of no contact, I got a letter. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten letter, in her uneven script, with ink smudges on the edges. It came by regular mail, my full name on the envelope. I don't know if it was an act of nostalgia, respect, or just a way to talk without me interrupting. The letter was long, for pages. It started with an, "I don't expect you to forgive me," and ended with an, "I just want you to know the whole truth, not the one I told myself." I read it all in one go. She told me things she hadn't mentioned. That, in the days before I arrived, she felt panicked. That part of her was scared of starting a life with me without having fully buried her history with that guy. That it wasn't planned. But when he called to see her one last time, she agreed. That it was impulsive. That, during it, she already felt bad but didn't know how to stop. That, afterwards, she didn't feel liberated like she expected, but empty. But what hit me most was a line towards the end. I never felt more confused than that night, because, while I was with him, I was thinking of you, and that didn't stop me. And, since then, I've been trying to forgive myself for that, but maybe I shouldn't. I stared at that sentence for hours, because right there, in that line, was everything I needed to know. It wasn't just an impulsive mistake. It was a choice she justified in her head, knowing it wasn't right. It wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a conscious decision she preferred to hide, packaged as something unimportant. I spent the whole weekend with the letter open on the table, reading it over and over, underlining phrases like I was studying for a test I didn't know how to pass. I imagined telling her what I thought. I imagined yelling. But mostly, I imagined myself silent, with her across the room, not knowing if I could touch her again with the same confidence. On Monday, I made a decision. It wasn't final. Nothing was at that moment, but I needed to see her again. Not to fix anything, just to look her in the eye and see if there was anything left worth rebuilding. I called her. She answered on the first ring. Her voice sounded like she'd been waiting for the call since I left. "Can we meet tomorrow?" I asked. "Whenever you want, wherever you want. At home. I'll be here at 8. I hung up without saying anything else. And, for the first time in weeks, I felt something like clarity. Not peace, not comfort, but a direction, a path. Even if it led to a dead end. I got home 5 minutes before we agreed. I'd spent the whole day replaying what this meeting would be like, going over 1,000 times the words I might say, the ones I definitely shouldn't, and the ones I knew I couldn't avoid. But when I put the key in the lock, that whole mental script fell apart like wet paper. She was in the kitchen, back to me, chopping something. It smelled like soup, like fresh-baked bread. The kind of things you do when you don't know how to start a heavy conversation. Things that give the illusion of normalcy, of home, of everything being able to go on. I didn't say anything. I dropped my backpack, hung up my jacket, and sat at the table. She didn't turn around. She quickly finished, set the table, and only then did she come over. She sat across from me, and we looked at each other for the first time in over 2 weeks. She looked different, thinner, more tired. Dark circles, dull skin, but mostly an expression I'd never seen. Raw vulnerability. Not the kind that wants pity, but the kind that knows they owe the truth. We didn't say anything for several minutes. The kind of thick silence that only exists between two people who know each other too well. "Thanks for coming," she said, finally. "I'm not here to fix anything yet. I'm just here to talk." "I know. I read your letter." She nodded, like she didn't know what else to say. I wondered how many times she'd rehearsed this conversation too, replayed it in her head. "Why did you tell me now?" I asked. She took her time. Drank some water. Not soup. Not food. Just water, like anything else was too heavy. Because I thought I was doing the right thing. Because when I started imagining the wedding, the photos, the vows, I felt like I was going to explode if I didn't get it out. I didn't want someone else to tell you first. I wanted to have that control. I wanted to stop it from hurting more later. And it hurt just the same. Yes, maybe more. Maybe. "And why didn't you tell me before I came?" She went silent. "Why didn't you tell me when I still had a choice?" She seemed to shrink, not physically, but emotionally. She got smaller. "Because I didn't want to lose you," she said, finally. There it was. The phrase. The one I'd been repeating to myself since I left. The one that confirmed it. Yes, she knew from the start that what she'd done was a betrayal. Maybe not with the official label of infidelity, but with all that comes with omission, manipulation, the one-sided choice of what truths I deserve to know. I got up and paced the room. She followed me with her eyes, silent. I needed to move, to feel the space, to touch the furniture, to recognize the place we'd built. And every object now seemed to have a shadow. The couch where we watched movies, the desk where we worked side by side, the bed, everything had a different texture. "Can I ask you something?" I said, not looking at her. "Yes." "Did you regret it at any point, after you did it?" "Yes." The exact moment it ended, I felt empty, stupid, but I convinced myself that if I didn't repeat it, if it didn't happen again, then I hadn't damaged anything real. "And you believe that?" "Not entirely, but I needed to believe it so I wouldn't destroy what I had." I sat down again, exhausted. "And if I had never found out?" I asked. She closed her eyes, took a breath. "Maybe I would have told you anyway. Someday. Maybe never. I don't know, but I do know that the weight of it was eating me up inside. You don't seem to have been carrying much weight until now. You don't know how hard it's been for me to sleep since you left." The conversation went on like this, long pauses and hard truths. We talked about things I never imagined I'd have to discuss with the person who was supposed to be my safe place. Me, trying to figure out if I could still love someone who hid something so fundamental. Her, trying to make me understand the mistake wasn't lack of love, but lack of courage, that she loved me so much she was scared of losing me. And because of that, she acted wrongly. Out of fear, selfishness, weakness. And maybe that was what hurt most, that there wasn't some big, scandalous, cinematic reason. It was just a mix of cowardice and bad judgment. And that's so human it hurts twice as much. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said before I left. "Just that, if someday you can, remember me as more than my worst mistake." I didn't answer. I left the house without saying if I'd be back. No promises, no plans. I just closed the door behind me and felt something inside me closing too, or changing, I don't know. The only thing I knew was that nothing was going to be the same. I almost went home that same night, out of habit, out of the urge to close the circle, but something stopped me on the corner of our street, in front of the dimly lit bar we'd nicknamed our spot. I sat on a stone bench across from its closed front and stared at the windows as if waiting for something to light up inside me. It didn't happen. I went back to my friend's apartment. When I walked in, he was watching TV but turned it off when he saw me. He asked with his eyes, no words. I just said, "We talked," and then shut myself in my room. That was the strangest night of all, because for the first time since I learned the truth, I didn't feel anger nor relief. I felt something much worse, disconnection, as if everything we'd lived was someone else's story, a series I'd finished watching but wasn't interested in replaying. I thought about the day I met her mother, the lunch in her garden full of hanging plants, how she gave me a tight hug like she'd known me forever. I thought about when we adopted our cats, and how one of them fell asleep on her lap the first night. I thought about all the times she asked me to trust her, to let my guard down. I did. I dropped all my defenses. I surrendered to this life with no escape plan. And now I found myself imagining what it would be like to leave again. It wasn't a sudden idea. It was a possibility that started to settle in like an unwelcome guest. Moving back to the States, getting my old job back. I still had contacts. Starting from scratch was a painful thought, but it no longer seemed absurd. The only problem was that it meant accepting that what I'd dreamed of for years, with her, was beyond repair. And yet I still hadn't decided, because, as stupid as it sounds, there were still moments when I caught myself imagining this could be fixed, that we could come out of this stronger, that all this pain was just a bump in the road. But that thought never lasted, because then I'd see the image of her with her ex again. And it wasn't some morbid fantasy. It was an emotional scene. Betrayal dressed up as a farewell. After days of no contact, she sent another short message. Can you come home on Friday? I just want us to talk one last time. Not to ask you for anything, not for you to decide, just to explain something I didn't tell you the other time. I took several hours to respond. I didn't know if I wanted to hear more. I'd had enough. I already knew I'd been cheated on, betrayed, lied to by omission. What more could a new version of the same story bring? Another explanation with words that couldn't fix anything anymore. In the end, I agreed. On Friday, I got to the apartment on time. No bags, no illusions. She was waiting in the same spot where we'd last talked, but this time, no food or dim lights, just the empty table and 2 glasses of water. I sat down. She didn't wait long to speak. I didn't tell you the whole truth. Not because I wanted to lie to you again, but because I was afraid of destroying what was left. I stayed still, said nothing, waited. When what happened with him happened, it wasn't just once. The silence became a knot in my throat. It was twice. Once the night before you got on the plane, and once weeks before. I didn't want to tell you because I knew that if I told you everything, there would be no room for you to even think about forgiving me. I had a hard time reacting, not because of the number itself, but because it confirmed that even after her letter, even after our most honest conversation, there was still more. And why now? I asked, my voice dry. Because if you're really going to hate me, I'd rather you hate me knowing everything. If you leave, I want you to leave knowing exactly why. I don't want to keep anything else hidden. I don't want to pretend to be anything anymore. That's when I understood there was no going back. Because you can't build trust on half-truths revealed in installments. You can't build a house on ground that shows you a new crack every week. I had left once, I had come back to talk, but now I felt, with cruel clarity, that there was nothing more to say. I stood up. She didn't try to stop me, didn't cry, didn't yell, just nodded. Like someone accepting that, finally, everything that needed to be said had been said. Are you leaving for good? She asked, almost a whisper. I don't know, but I can't go on like this. And I left. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel revenge, just a deep, shapeless sadness, as if something inside me had slowly died, and now there was only smoke. Returning to my friend's apartment that night was like going on autopilot. He didn't ask anything anymore. He knew any attempt at conversation would just bring out more pain, and I thanked him silently for that. I threw myself on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling for hours, not knowing if it was better to sleep or stay awake. In the end, I did neither. I just existed there, floating in that dead spot where you don't quite hurt yet, but you can't quite breathe either. The next day, I started packing my things. Not because I had a definite plan, not because I'd already decided to return to the States, but because I felt that staying there, in that borrowed room, was like prolonging a wait that no longer made sense. I had exhausted all conversations, squeezed out every last drop of understanding I had left. It wasn't about wanting to forgive or not anymore. It was about not having anything to work with. As I packed my clothes into the backpack, I thought about something a therapist told me years ago when I was going through a crisis after losing a close relative. Some pain doesn't get resolved. It just settles in the body like a scar. I didn't get it at the time. Now I do. What had happened with her wasn't a wound that would heal with time. It was a mark that would remain, something that would live with me. And the real decision was what kind of life I wanted to have with that mark. One where I kept looking at it every day, or one where I could live with it without it destroying me inside. 2 days later, I got a cheap Airbnb downtown, a minimal studio with white walls, a small bed, and a kitchen that seemed more like an afterthought, but it was mine. No one had slept there with me. No one had kept secrets in that place. It was neutral ground, and that, at that moment, was enough. She texted me twice more, short messages. One to say she'd gathered my things from the house and had them in boxes, another to ask if she could return a book of mine that, she said, she couldn't look at without crying. I didn't answer either, not as punishment, not out of pride, but because I had nothing new to tell her. Everything I needed to say, I'd said, and everything I needed to know, I knew. One night, I found myself reading an old journal, one I'd started right after moving in with her. On the first page was a sentence that gave me chills. I feel like I'm finally starting the part of my life where I don't have to run anymore. How ironic. I'd been running all this time without realizing it, running after an idealized image of her, of what I believed our story was, running from my doubts, my fears, the small signs I'd ignored so as not to face this truth. You can love someone very much and still not be able to continue. As the days went by, I began to reconnect with other parts of myself. I took walks in neighborhoods I didn't know. I had coffee in bookstores. I started writing again, things that had nothing to do with pain. It wasn't happiness, not even peace. It was just an internal truce. Something like the silence after a storm. You don't know if it's going to rain again, but for now, you can sit and listen to the wind. And that's when I got an email. Not from her, from her mother. It wasn't long. She told me she'd read part of the letter her daughter showed her, apparently trying to process it all with someone else, and that she just wanted to tell me two things. First, that she deeply regretted everything. Not because it affected me as her son-in-law, but because she considered me family, and she hated that someone so close to her had caused so much damage. Second, that she didn't expect me to forgive or come back, but she wanted to thank me for loving her daughter in a way very few people in her life had. I read that message many times. It broke me in two, because it reminded me of what we almost had, because it reminded me of all that was real. Not everything was a lie, not everything was a farce, and that, somehow, hurts more than if it had been. Because that means something beautiful was destroyed by an avoidable mistake. Because that means what we lost was, indeed, valuable. I replied to her mother with a few words. I thanked her. I told her I wished her daughter could heal, and that I was trying to do the same. Nothing more. That was the last time I spoke to anyone connected to her. Since then, weeks have passed. I haven't seen her, haven't been back to the apartment, haven't spoken to her. I'm still in that small studio, writing, eating badly, and rebuilding myself in silence. Some nights I miss her with a brutal force. Others, I remember her with distance, like it all happened in another life. In both versions, I'm still trying to figure out how to move on, but at least now, I'm doing it without clinging to an illusion. And that, I think, is the first step. The first Sunday of April dawned with an absurd clarity. One of those mornings where everything seems clean, new, but you're not ready to feel that way yet. I walked to a park a few blocks from the studio. Nothing special. A couple of benches, young trees, and families with kids running after balls or bikes. I sat alone, with a watery coffee and a paper cup, watching life go by like a movie that no longer included me. And that's when I felt it. Not pain, not nostalgia, but a kind of emptiness that didn't weigh so much anymore. Something that was just there, like when you take off a cast, and the skin underneath is strange, sensitive, but free. That was the first time I understood that maybe I wasn't going back to her, that maybe there was no turning back. Not because I couldn't forgive her, though I wasn't sure if I could, but because I no longer wanted to return to a life where I didn't know if the truth was complete. At some point, I realized I'd stopped loving the person she was now. I still loved who I thought she was, the woman who smiled at me on FaceTime from her kitchen, who waited for me at the airport with a scarf in her hand and eyes full of future. That version of her, the one that existed before that confession in the park, was gone. Maybe she never was. Maybe it was my own construction, a puzzle where only I saw the complete picture even though the pieces didn't fit. I went home that day with a strange calmness, a resignation that wasn't sadness, the kind of acceptance you don't choose, but that comes anyway. I opened my laptop, drafted an email with the subject, "Final Decision," and left it in drafts for 3 days. I read it over and over, changed words, started again, until finally, I sent it. I didn't say much. I told her I appreciated everything that was good, because there was good, that our relationship changed me, taught me things, gave me moments I couldn't and didn't want to erase, but that it also broke me in a way I couldn't ignore. I told her she deserved someone who could see her without that shadow between us, and that I, no matter how hard I tried, wasn't going to be that guy. That it hurt me to write it, but that I had made the decision not to return. There was no immediate response. Hours passed, days. I started to think she wasn't going to say anything, and part of me was bracing for that, to end this in silence. But the email arrived Friday night. It was short, just a few lines. I understand. I won't push. I just hope you find something you don't have to doubt. I'm going to try too. Thank you for being my safe place, even when I didn't know how to take care of it. I don't deserve for you to come back, but you deserve to be at peace. I read it 3 times before closing the computer, and I cried. Not from anger, not exactly from sadness. It was something else. A strange kind of grief for someone who's still alive, but who's no longer in your life. A silent cry for everything that will never be. Since then, more than a month has passed. I haven't heard from her. I haven't written either. No blocks, no fights, no drama, just distance. Real distance, the kind not measured in miles, but in decisions. I've gone back to work. I'm considering moving to another city, still in the US for now. I started therapy. I'm taking better care of myself. There are good days and days that are hell disguised as normal. Sometimes I hear her laugh in my head, and I have to shake it off like water in my ears. But I keep going. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.